Good morning, everybody. My name's Kathryn Kuhn. I've got this fancy title called the Senior Director for DevOps Services. Actually, a little bit of background on myself before I get going on our talk about the convergence of Agile and DevOps and getting more out of each one of these initiatives by leveraging concepts from the other. I actually have been an Agile transformation consultant with Rally for a number of years, actually prior to that doing Agile transformations across big companies and small companies. I live in Silicon Valley, so I've been doing Agile pretty much as long as anybody has. I've actually never really done waterfall. One group tried to make me use waterfall techniques and it made me sad. And so I said, hey, there's a better way. It's called these Agile method things. And they said, great, go ahead, give it a try, but don't tell anyone because it's illegal here. And I jokingly say, and thus a role was born, because I learned how to advocate for these methods that I know that are really great to work with, that make stronger teams and better products over these waterfall methods. So I've just learned how to advocate for that, but now in larger companies that are publicly traded or have financial and security oversights. And actually, a little known fact, I started my career running what we now know as continuous delivery, continuous integration teams. So that was my beginning. I was that sad person on the build team that got all the crap codes sent at me. And they're like, just figure it out, Kathryn, and get it into the test environment. And then get it to our customers with some degree of consistency. So taking on this new role within CA Technologies, they actually acquired Rally. And trying to converge the two worlds is, for me, bringing my career full circle. So a little bit about this DevOps community and a little bit of background. I love this particular cartoon because it really sums up what DevOps is. People are running around saying it's about operational monitoring and making sure that it's consistent across your applications. No, it's about testing and making sure you shift left and find bugs earlier and make sure you shift all of your security testing earlier in the cycle. No, it's about organizing your source code, or it's about the culture. And the nice part is they're all right. Everybody's right. All those things are DevOps, but they're also all wrong because very few people are seeing the whole. And so, but that's human and that's natural. One of the ways that I got into this particular talk, or was inspired by this talk, is I was at an Agile conference. Actually, it wasn't really an Agile conference. And I was wearing this big orange shirt that said, ask me about Agile practices. And somebody walked up to me and introduced himself, and he runs operations for a really large bank. And he said, I know what those Agile methods are. That's how you get your crap code into production faster. And I thought for a second, I'm like, okay, challenge accepted. And that's how I started thinking about this. How do I explain what Agile is? How do I explain what DevOps is? And how do I help people appreciate what the divide is all about? So just to make sure I know what my audience is all like, how many of you consider yourselves DevOps people? Okay, I got a few. Oh, quite a few. Okay, great. How many people consider yourselves like not technical? You're really more on the project, process, product side, Agile side? Okay. Great, okay. So it looks like the room is split 50-50. So I'll try and work from both perspectives. The other interesting thing that I'm seeing in a lot of companies is that these two methods or these two movements are really held very separately in organizations. One of my current clients has a VP of DevOps and a VP of Agile. And they're organizing their work completely and utterly separately and differently, often orthogonally and often almost competitively. Well, Kathryn, I can't really work on the Agile transformation right now because we're doing a DevOps transformation. Or, Kathryn, we can't really do this DevOps transformation because we're doing an Agile transformation. And what I know to be true is we really need to bring these two together, that you really can't be successful with one without the other. So how do I start to bridge this divide? And that's what this talk is all about. So first of all, I'll tell you that these movements are far more alike than they are different. They actually cite the same thought leaders. Eliyahu Goldratt from The Goal, if anybody's read that, Deming, Drucker, Don Reinertsen. These are the same thought leaders that we hold high in the Agile community as well as in the DevOps community. We're also all grounded in the same lean principles. We might have started on the Agile side with this notion of Scrum and individual teams, but for everybody working in the enterprise, we knew we had to turn to lean. And in the DevOps universe, they've always turned to lean as a way to slim down their processes, turn to flow and efficiency and managing work in progress. So lean is a founding principle for these two. The other part is that in order to be effective, you have to figure out how to connect your overall strategy to your execution. That is key for Agile planning. You have an overall strategy for your organization or for where your product is trying to head, and we use Agile methods at scale to connect that strategy to your execution arm. On the DevOps side, it's just the other side around. You have to have that overall strategy of where you're trying to connect your product or take your product or your company. And the same thing, these DevOps methods help you connect your execution arm so that your product is resilient, performant, runs in all the languages you need it to run, and that you can respond to change quickly. And then, of course, culture underlies everything. That we know that in order to make these movements work, that we have to break down organizational silos, that we have to show people that you have to see the whole, that you can't keep optimizing for individual portions, and that this culture of being transparent and being open and responding to failure or mistakes with grace and dignity and respect is essential. And these are all essential to the same movements, to Agile and to DevOps. For you Agile people, you actually know more about DevOps than you realize. The first one, for some of you, maturity models. Is anybody into maturity models in the Agile space? I'm not so much. You know, we've had kind of a love-hate relationship with maturity models. We've tried for years and years to try and create these Agile maturity models. And we find that they don't always serve us. The same thing is happening in the DevOps movement, that there are dozens of maturity models emerging, and they are at once too specific and too general at the same time, and not serving us. So same phenomenon. Sequential versus adaptive planning. How many times I wish I had $1 for every time I walked into an organization that showed me their Agile transformation plan using MS Project and Gantt charts, and a waterfall technique, and phase gate milestones. And I always kind of go, do you get the irony of this? That you plan Agile transformations using Agile planning methods. The same thing is happening in the DevOps movement. I'm walking into DevOps, into organizations, and they are showing me their waterfall, phase gate, first, then, 3-year roadmaps for how they're going to do a DevOps transformation. The Agile side, we've learned this. We've learned that adaptive planning is the best kind of planning. And the same is true for planning an Agile transformation as planning a DevOps transformation. You've also learned the power of Gemba, a Gemba walk. Are you familiar with that? It's where you go and you walk around. It comes from Toyota and from Lean, and the idea that a manager would walk the floor and observe what was happening. Rather than looking strictly at just spreadsheets and status reports, they would go and see what's going on within their organizations and within their shop floors. The same is true for Agilists. We know that while it's important to look at tools and understand what's your velocity and how many stories are you getting done, you also know that it's extraordinarily powerful to just go and watch and observe, and watch a sprint planning meeting, and watch a stand-up, and watch an end of sprint review, and to take notes, and to facilitate. So you already know this. The same is true in in DevOps. That in the DevOps movement, we know that it's one thing to see what your defect introduction rate is and what's your performance CPU utilization numbers for production, or how many releases are you getting done per month, per week, per day. But at the same time, being able to observe and to see what's going on in your organizations is also very, very powerful. Let's see. And then finally, you know as Agilists that data is meant to inform and prompt. How many times have you tried to explain velocity and what velocity is? More than you can count, right? How many people have been in organizations where velocity is misused, abused? You had a manager set a goal, 20% increase in velocity? It's my favorite. Oh yeah. So it's I don't know if you guys know this story. And a lot of managers, I've seen a lot of managers do this. We want all the teams to we want everyone to be more productive, so I want a 20% increase in velocity. And the team goes, okay, that's easy. It's unitless, so they just start goosing up their estimates. Goal met. So the same is true. So as Agilists, we know to teach our leadership team that you use data to inform as a prompt for a conversation. Hey, we're seeing that velocity is running a wide range here. It's not really consistent and settling down. Let's talk about why that might be, rather than worrying about whether it's a 13 or a 27. The same is true on the DevOps side. We know that there's a lot of data floating out there, a lot of, even more so than in the Agile space in terms of dashboards and data and information. But we know as Agilists that data should be meant as a prompt, not as a, what do you mean there's 243 defects against just this module in our defect tracking system? Nobody knows that. That could be a false positive. A lot of things could have caused that. That doesn't mean that the quality of your product is suspect. So you know how to use these techniques. All right, so I'm going to try and explain DevOps briefly, not thoroughly, and definitely through the lens of scaled Agile, and through that and trying to, for those of you who are familiar with kind of Agile at scale, I do tend to lean towards like safe nomenclature. So if I do that, sorry, I'm not meant to support safe. It's kind of easier to standardize on one set of vocabulary. So if we think about the goal of all of our organizations is really to get to something called business agility. And business agility is your organization's ability to sense and respond to change quickly and confidently and as a matter of everyday business. And there's a lot to unpack there. So the first one is sensors, sense and respond. Some organizations are really great at responding. We call that squirrel syndrome. Squirrel, move there, move there, move there. Some of them may not have the sensors, so they move a lot slower, or it takes a long time for those sensors to come into play. Quickly and confidently. Some organizations, they have all the sensors and they have all the information, but they're not able to make decisions. It takes a long time. Or they make a decision and then they change their mind. Or they think they made a decision and then everyone leaves the room and goes and does what they thought they should do all along. And doesn't really support the decision. So it's quickly and confidently. And then finally, as a matter of everyday business. I have a bank that I worked with that very happily told me, Kathryn, we supported Apple Pay within 6 months of it, or 6 weeks of it coming out. I'm like, that's great. What kind of wake did you leave through your organization? Did you have to form a tiger team? Were those people taken off of projects? Did you all of a sudden have all this work that suddenly got stopped, disrupted, thrown up in the air because you sensed and responded to this change, but it's not as a matter of everyday business? And they kind of stopped and like, oh, yeah, we did the tiger team thing. Oh, yeah, we did create a large wake. So that's not as a matter of everyday business. Okay? So that's business agility in a nutshell. We also have this notion that organizations, in order to support business agility, need to become a modern software factory. And modern software factories take your idea, I have an idea for a product or for an enhancement or a new feature, and I need to get it through my software factory and produce my product and put it into my customer's hands. All those lean principles. A modern software factory embraces agility, but it also embraces automation, that it's not just enough to plan with agility and agile in mind. You have to execute with speed and automation. You need to generate insights about your product, about how it's behaving, about how your customer is interacting with your product, and the quality of the product that you're producing. And then finally, you have to integrate security. There are very few organizations left that can hold security at bay and say, we don't need to really worry about it as much. That with this notion of Internet of Things, with software bleeding more and more into our lives, everyone needs to think about security at all levels of the software development lifecycle. So that's your modern software factory, okay? Another view of this is something, this one's been around for 20-something years, this idea of going from idea, again, to product, and it passes through a number of different stages. So, of course, you have your idea, And then you want to make sure that you identify your opportunity, that you figure out, well, how am I going to fund it? Am I going to fund it with a lot of money? Am I going to pull from something else? How do I figure out the budget for funding this really awesome idea, like supporting Apple Pay, for example? How do I plan and sequence the work? And then finally, your analysis, the parts that everybody's familiar with, your analysis, your design, your build, your test. You validate it, you deploy it to production or to a near stage production environment, get to business implementation, and then finally benefit realization. And all those sensors. That's kind of if you flattened it out, it would look fairly waterfall. And that's true, because the goal in all of this, in business agility, is to be able to do this with the shortest sustainable lead time. That means as an matter of everyday business. So your sensors over here on the left, being able to sense and respond to change, which is your funding, planning, and sequencing, and then developing quickly and confidently, so pushing it up through your development and deployment organizations and into your customers' hands to then figure out, did this solve the problem? And it's not just enough to push through this loop once really fast, but to be able to do it over and over and over again with the shortest sustainable lead time. That's Agile. And that's business agility. So now, and then when you start layering on the different methods, so on the left side, we know like enterprise lean startup, product discovery, safe, Kanban. But on the right side, that's the land of DevOps on this model. So now you're starting to look at continuous integration, test automation, continuous deployment, continuous delivery, big data, and analytics. So this is how, if you think about the left side as scaling Agile, and the right side as scaling DevOps. Up this horseshoe. You guys with me so far? Okay. So if you think about your steps then, we tend to start with, number one, we start with Agile teams when we're starting to work with Agile within our organizations. And we're all familiar with, okay, I form my Agile team, we're going to do some stories, do a little bit of Scrum. But then on the right side is where we also need to scale. And this is the part that I often see organizations skip, is these practices around making sure your build pipelines are solid, that it's not just enough to automate it with some Perl scripting, that you actually have to be using a tool for scheduling, that your source code management tools are organized so that you can be doing what's called trunk-based development. If you're creating a lot of feature branches, you're doing it wrong. That everybody should be working off the trunk and checking in source code every day, often multiple times a day, but if you can at least get them to once a day, that's a big start. So Agile teams, but they should also be using DevOps practices, dev team-based practices within their Agile teams. I see the left a lot, I don't always see the right. I got my DevOps people nodding their heads like, you're right. So, great that you want to scale and you want to do big room planning and you want to plan in quarterly increments, and that's awesome. And you want to think about epics and features, and that's great up the left side, but that's also when you should be investing in your release automation and your continuous integration. That this is where your test automation really comes into play, that it's not just unit test automation, but you should be doing security automation. How is your test data? Are you able to create environments that you can do this level of continuous testing across the entire application? Or is it only late stage once or twice right before you deploy to production, you hope? Okay? So finally, you get to Agile steering up the left side. That's great. Portfolio management, phenomenal concepts, managing your funding levels. And at the same time, that's when you should be investing deeply in your deployment automation, as well as continuous delivery into your customers' hands. So things like feature toggles, where you're able to deploy to production, but maybe only turn a feature on at certain times of the day, or only for certain customers, or only for certain regions, or maybe be able to turn it on, run a limited test, and then turn it back off. So this being able to deploy continuously to production at the same time you're moving up through portfolio management. Okay? Conceptual model? All right. And then finally, Agile value streams and Agile operations. So Agile operations meaning you're able to give feedback loops back from your operations group into your development cycles so that you can say, for example, you know, the monitoring, the error monitoring of my application, it's not as resilient as it should be. It finds the error and then the application goes, I'm going to die right here. And instead, it should be much more resilient. It should detect errors. It should be able to self-correct, self-start, and shouldn't need a human being to interact with the application or with the service in order to restart it. So that's Agile operations. All right. So that was a good conceptual model, but you still don't know where to start. You're still like, okay, I get it, but you know, where do I start with? So I will tell you that the biggest bottleneck right now still is QA. You know, even in our most advanced DevOps shops, they say that 63% of them that will tell you that the most delays are occurring in QA stage of the cycle. So it's not early in your planning. They don't complain about your ability to plan or even pre-testing or even on the deployment. What they will tell you is getting your application through the knothole that is QA and testing is really the place where we can smooth out and where we need to focus our energies the most. And this is even with our most mature DevOps shops are still saying QA is the place where they still need to really focus their attentions. So it stands to reason that most of you are in organizations where, yep, I would say QA is the place to start. So there's a concept in scaled Agile called develop on a cadence, release on demand. And this idea is that your development organizations or your development teams all work on a cadence or a sprint, and those sprints are organized into, let's call them quarterly boundaries. And you plan and you do your development along those cadence cycles, and you never take a break. You never have a hardening phase. You just keep going. And that at any point during that development quarter, you can release your code. And that sounds great. And it is really mother effing hard. Like, I don't know anyone that's really, actually I do know a very small number of companies that have been able to pull this off, but it's rare. And that the vast majority of has to live with some kind of delay cycle, quarterly boundaries, some reason why this is just too far a reach from where you are today. So another concept is something called a system demo. So you have your end of sprint demos. And then the idea is that as you have coordinated teams of teams working on an Agile project or program or epic or whatever you want to call it, and that at the end of the sprint, you can demo all the code integrated across all the teams within a week after the sprint ends. So you finish sprint 1, and then 1 week into sprint 2, you can take all the code and you can demo it together because it's all been integrated. So again, for most companies, that's a bridge too far. They can maybe they tell me, well, we don't develop enough in the first sprints to make that worth our while, okay? And then it's really hard to integrate, and then we can't test. Well, we don't really have the test environments for this. So we can pull off this system demo thing, you know, maybe once, tops twice during a quarter. So again, that one, kind of a bridge too far. So really, if you want to go back from your organizations and go and work with teams and say, we want to start to converge our Agile and DevOps, the best place to start is your end of sprint reviews or your end of iteration reviews. And go to that meeting. So what do I mean by this? And what goes on in end of sprint review? Who can tell me, like, what goes on in an end of sprint review for any of you that are there? You demonstrate all the features you worked on for a given sprint, right? Where do you demo it? Do you show it in a PowerPoint? So you show actual working code, okay? Do you see it working out of an IDE like an Eclipse, or should it be working code? It should be the end user experience, okay? So no one should be pulling out Eclipse. Nobody should be looking at an Ubuntu command prompt. You should be looking at actual working code, right? Okay, what else goes on in end of sprint review? Yes? You can talk about the testing that was done to validate. Right, so you talk about the testing that was done to validate, right? We have this thing called a definition of done. What's the definition of done? Sorry? You know the story's complete. So what are some examples of some things on a definition of done in your organizations? Testing's complete, automation's done, scripts are done. What else? Documentation is done. Code reviews are done, right? How many of you have really lengthy definitions of done? Actually, first I'll start with this. How many of you have definitions of done? Good, okay. How many of you have more than 10 items on your definition of done? Okay, a few of you, all right. So the first thing I will say is go to an end of sprint review and look and see, are you really demoing working code? Really, really? And that is not on the person's laptop. She opens up her laptop and says, here it is, it's working locally, just on my laptop. Or here, let me fire up Eclipse and show you the code. What you should be demoing is that should be code that has been checked into your source code management repository. It should be built and deployed to an early stage test environment, and that's where you should be demoing it. The end user experience, operating, not the code, not working on a local laptop, not running out of an IDE, and certainly not a PowerPoint descriptor of what the code might do. But that's really, are you really doing that? Every single time for every story. And that's the other thing I see a lot of, is that maybe it's the first few stories, but not all your stories, and not in every sprint. The first few sprints, you're pretty good, but it starts getting later into the sprint, and then something happens. We start looking at our definition of done and saying, oh, we're running out of time. We'll do those code reviews later. We'll get that done later. Or, oh, well, we found a lot of bugs, but we don't have time to fix them all, so we'll do that later. And next thing you know, you start declaring a bit of a holiday from your definition of done, and you don't follow it every single time. Okay? The other thing I would ask is, what % of your definition of done is automated? I've seen a number of spreadsheets come out. Who manages their definition of done in a spreadsheet? Maybe a checklist. All too often I see like a template story with them all listed as tasks, and then you copy the story, and then the tasks don't always get filled out, or you wait until the end and you just go done, 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 and you declare it done even though you didn't finish your code reviews, just because you want all the tasks to be closed so you can get credit for the story being done. Anybody do that? Looking down, maybe. Okay, you don't have to admit it to me. So it is much better to have a smaller, shorter definition of done that is automated, and you stick to it every time without fail, every story, every sprint, than it is to have a long, aspirational definition of done that you maybe get done, maybe don't. Because what happens now, and this is kind of scary. At first, I've got developers going, yeah, short definition of done, and the QA people saying, no, you can't do that. I'd rather know, as a QA person or an ops person, I'd rather know the truth. I'd rather know exactly what's been tested, what's really gone through code review, where is that code really sitting, really, is it really in my source code management, is it really on a branch, a little branch or a little side repository you got created over here? I'd rather know that than to create this illusion in your systems and your human systems that tell you that the code is more mature than it is and better tested than it is. And the first place where you can hold the line is those end of sprint reviews. And if then the teams complain and say, well, we can't get it all done then it's great. Let's chop the definition of done down to 3 things we can do every time without fail. And to make it even more of an imperative, automate it. So it is not possible to promote your code until those items are completed. So far, so good. Head nods. I'm looking around the room. Everyone's like, yeah, that sounds great, Kathryn. Yeah, it can't happen in my organization. There's no way. So I get you. It's not easy to do, but as Agilists, you actually can figure out and facilitate a conversation. So remember that Gemba, you can go and watch an end of sprint review. And then you can use something like this. This is a lean change canvas. There's a bunch of them out there, or mini lean change, and it's for tracking essentially an improvement plan. We know that this is what our current state is. We demo our code, maybe. We use Eclipse. We don't really test it all that much. Maybe we got our unit tests done, and we certainly don't have our code reviews done. That's our current state. We want our next target state to look like this. And then these are the steps to get us there. And then we just document, on the left side, what's working with us, what are some things that are working in our favor. We've got a couple of people on the build team that are phenomenal at scripting, and they've been playing around with some new tools and stage gates. So we think we can work in code reviews and make code reviews mandatory, and that it's not possible to promote your code until the code review is done. Awesome. What have we got working against us? A development manager that's not behind us. Or a QA manager that maybe is a little overzealous, that also isn't supportive because they think the list should be longer. And then your backlog, just kind of a classic backlog. These are the ideas we have for what we should do. These are the ones that are filled out, ready to go, stage development all the way through. You probably have your own, but this is a way that as Agile teams and as DevOps teams, you can come together. Put this up on a wall. Start talking about your end of sprint reviews and say, what's going on, what's our current state, and what are ideas to work together to improve our end of sprint reviews so that we can do not just these great Agile practices where we're finishing our stories and our acceptance criteria are really filled out well, and we've got a nice velocity going and we feel good about that part, but that we're also making sure that we take care of the craft of developing software. That we embrace that and take that seriously, that we are craftsmen, that we work in this modern software factory, and that we need to make sure that we pull forward those development techniques that are really important and doing them as early as possible. Guys have seen something like this before? I'll publish the slides so you have this, but lean change, like I said, use anyone you want, but this is how you can start to facilitate the conversation to figure out what's the next best step for your teams in terms of bringing your Agile and your DevOps practices together using the end of sprint review. So I'll say it again. You guys know way more. For my Agile people, you know way more about DevOps than you realize, and for my DevOps people, you know way more about Agile than you realize. So the first one is maturity models. We've all kind of learned, they're interesting, and they don't always help. And that we're much better if we're focused on capabilities and look at how are we maturing certain capabilities that are most important, that are having the biggest impact on our ability to develop software. And when I talk about our performance at developing software. And when I talk about performance in software, I mean not just speed, but also reliability. You've got to have both components when you think about your software capabilities. You also know that adaptive planning over sequential planning, that you use a lean canvas like what I just showed you to figure out what's the next best step, that you don't try to plan out your entire DevOps transformation, or you don't look and say, how can I figure out how to improve unit testing across all my applications and all my teams all at the same time? Because we know that not all organizations and not all teams and not all applications have the most pressing problem to be unit testing. For some, it could be their source code management. For others, it could be security testing. For others, it could be their deployment automation. So to make these grand proclamations across all applications that say everyone should be doing unit test automation doesn't work. We learned this in Agile planning when someone said, okay, every project is going to Agile. We're going to Agilify all the things, and we're going to take all our requirements and we're going to rewrite them as stories. And that didn't work and still doesn't work. We still keep trying that, but it doesn't work. So for the same reason that we don't try to declare an entire organization Agile and every project Agile, and we start with where it matters most and where you can have the most amount of success, the same is true as DevOps. You've got to have context, and you've got to make sure that you take in capabilities. The other piece I will tell you is in Agile, we've learned that by walking around and following pain and observing and listening and looking at data, that we put together a much more holistic picture of what our organizations are doing. The same is true in DevOps. I follow the pain. So there might be a lot of pain going on in the QA organizations, and others it's deployment automation. And when I follow the pain, I usually uncover a pretty wide disparity and gap between what the executives see. They think, oh, those releases are going into production. It only takes us, it's on Fridays. We're usually done by Saturday afternoon, so it's not that bad. Well, then you go and you talk to the poor teams that have to do those deployments every Friday afternoon, often staying all night, Friday night on to Saturday, and it's painful, and they're trying to get a hold of people, and there's a lot of pain associated with that. So as Agilists, as DevOps people, learn to follow the pain, and that's one of the ways that you can figure out what's most important to work on next. And then finally, using data to inform and prompt for a conversation. Unit test automation coverage. That's great, and I love that as a metric, but it doesn't tell the whole story about the quality of the unit testing or the quality of the overall testing in general. And sometimes with some organizations, it's just knowing the number is a big win. And I don't care that the number is 40%, just the sheer fact that they know their unit test automation. For those of you who may not know, there's a way to measure if your unit tests cover all your code, that's 100% coverage, but it's really hard to write unit tests that cover every single line of code in your applications. So you just measure what percent your coverage is. And some people chase 100%. And if you're constantly changing your code, yep, that happens, and it's hard. It's a tough one to chase. For other organizations, just getting on the board at 40% was a big win. So use data to inform and know that it's contextual, and know that what's a great goal for one organization may not be the right goal for another organization. When you look at deployment automation, for some organizations or in the same organization, one application deploys once a quarter, and that is fast enough. Their users don't want to hear from it faster. They're in the financial or HR space. They just don't want their applications changing faster than once a quarter. That's all they can take on. Then I switch to another application group in the same company, in the same IT organization, and deploying once a week isn't nearly fast enough. So you can't set these global goals of saying how often are you deploying, because it's going to depend on the context of each application. So use that data to inform and as a prompt for a conversation, and look and see what are the next best goals, not as a way to get a sense for what everybody's being able to do. Okay? So hopefully this is sounding familiar. The other thing I will tell you, so back on the capabilities and the maturity models, this is an example. It is not the example. This is the DORA DevOps assessment. It is from the same organization that brings the State of DevOps report, so Gene Kim, Nicole Forsgren. They've brought forth the data that they use and have gathered year over year in organization after organization. So I think they're up to like 26,000 different data points. And these are the capabilities that they are saying are helping organizations achieve organizational and DevOps maturity. And what I like about it is it takes that holistic view that we know you need to take when it comes to kind of measuring your capabilities. They look at metrics, they look at operations, it looks at your processes, and it looks at your technical practices. So it tries to take one of the more holistic views here. It's got the eye candy with the nice wheel. So it gives you a sense of where you are compared to the highest performers in your organization, which is that black line, and then where you are compared to others within your industry. So in some cases, it might be the financial services sector, how do you compare to other banks or other financial transactions or financial organizations, versus do you want to compare yourself and your ability to create a collaborative culture across all the organizations. So I like this one. The other thing what it does is it allows you to generate something called a priority matrix. So when you do the DORA DevOps assessment, it looks and says, and this is all relative, it looks at your capability strength. So first and foremost, the higher it goes means that this is what you're strongest at in these different capabilities. And the more that it shifts to the right, means that it's having a greater and greater impact on your ability to develop software with both speed and reliability. So you might be really fast, but you might not be very reliable. You might have a lot of production problems or security outages. Or you might be really great at security and your application is bulletproof, but you can only do one release a year, or just not meeting your customers' needs in terms of speed. So how is it that these capabilities are impacting your ability to develop? So what it does is it snaps to, if you're on the far right in that lower left-hand corner, or right-hand corner with the gray area, it means these are the capabilities that you probably need to work on next. And so it gives you a sense of that priority. So in this particular example, your production change processes are probably the big winner, that if you work on that, smooth that out, probably make it less onerous, shorten the form, make it more contextual so that you don't have the same process for moving a small jar file change to production to fix a spelling error on your website as you do with changing the underlying database structures for your financial systems. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations have one change control process to rule them all. And as you can imagine, those two contexts, or those two examples I gave you, are extraordinarily different risk profiles to your company. So getting to much more of a risk-based profile in your change processes. The other thing it talks about is your test data management. That's another winner. Many organizations can't get enough production data, or they rely on production copies, which is, in this day and age of security and the content and privacy, is really difficult. So you're probably working off of very old copies of production data. So how can you make sure that you have the most robust test data sets possible, but at the same time still respecting the privacy and the compliance laws that you need for testing in your environments, plus just the, managing these large enough data sets. So oftentimes I see companies with maybe 1 or 2 testing environments, not the 37 that they probably need with the different data sets. So again, this is the DORA research, DORA DevOps assessment. It's capability-based, not maturity model-based. So you see the difference. So you can take this, your organization can take it, and then a year later take it again, and it'll have entirely different answers. And that's okay, and that's to be expected, because it's all about what's impacting your ability to develop software now and the most, versus what's the most important thing for this VP that we want to work on because they're really big on security, for example. Not that security is not important, just saying it doesn't have to override everything else. Okay? So as Agilists, how can you help your DevOps friends? First of all, be their friend. DevOps organizations are awash in great ideas. I live in a 100-year-old house. Actually, it's 110 years old. And my honey-do list is long. It's impossibly long. It has more things on there than I will ever have money or time to work on. And that's how most of your DevOps teams feel. There is more work, technical debt, technical drag to work on than they will ever have people or money or time to work on. So if you're in that environment, what do you need to do? You need to prioritize. Who are masters at prioritization? Agile coaches, people who are into Agile, because we learn how to prioritize what's important. We can figure out how to do rough sizing, and we can figure out the items that give you the best impact for the least amount of effort and figure out how to float those to the top of the list. What a great skill to have. For a DevOps team awash in too many things that they can do and too many competing initiatives and everyone yelling at them saying you need to do more, go over and help your DevOps teams prioritize their backlog. That is the first, you've got a superpower there in that ability, and you can make a tremendous impact with your DevOps teams by just teaching them that simple technique. The other thing you can do is, a lot of you maybe, it's called PI planning, big room planning, quarterly planning. Are any of you guys doing that yet? So a lot of your DevOps teams, they're supposed to be invited, and they'll show up probably for the first one, and then I find they don't show up so much after that, because they're kind of boring for most DevOps teams and most system teams, and they don't have as much to say, or they'll show up and then they'll multitask. So as people organizing these events, pull in your DevOps team and find out why. Why is that event not working for them? Because it should be. It is their window as to what's coming in the quarter. They can work on things and get ahead. It can help them prioritize that backlog, and it can also help them give voice to some work that really needs to get done, but they need assistance from the dev teams to get it done. So how can you bring forward your DevOps teams and make sure that they're participating in those PI planning events consistently and enthusiastically? Because there's a lot of benefit for them to be there. Maybe it's just reminding them what's in it for them. and making sure that comes forward. Maybe there's something about the way the agenda's been organized that doesn't work for them as well. But to get in there and to find out. The other part is that you've got a superpower of you know how to do lean and you know how to manage WIP and you can organize Kanban boards. Again, with all that work in your DevOps teams, vast majority of DevOps teams have work that is unplannable. It comes in as tickets. It comes in as production incidents. It comes in as the fire of the day or a security incident. So what better method, not Scrum, but lean, Kanban, to teach them how to use those methods to organize their work. And you can help them organize their work into a team-based Kanban board like I have up here, help them create their swim lanes and their expedite lane, and show them how to use it and to use aging to figure out how are you going to organize your work and how are you going to deal with all this work that is not plannable. I've had so many VPs of operations tell me that Agile thing's kind of cool, but Scrum, you know, we tried that and burn downs and it didn't really resonate. I'm like, I know, it doesn't resonate. So stop trying to Scrumify your operations work, instead turn to lean and Kanban. And then the answer is usually, we can do that? I'm like, yeah. It's a much better method. And then as Agile people, a lot of you know these methods. You can set up these boards and help them out. And then finally, the other superpower you have as Agile people is that being able to connect all this DevOps effort with your feature epic values and your value attainment. So you know that this particular feature or epic is really, really important to get done. And in order to get it done and push it through your development life cycle, there is more than likely there's going to be infrastructure work, there's going to be build work, there's going to be automation work, there might be some new functions that need to happen in production. Now you can connect all of that work with the feature, with the business value. And that's unfortunately where a lot of DevOps teams languish, is that they don't really know how their work connects to the business and to the company making money. There's this bright line, and the connection rarely happens. And that is where you can come in, and you can start to make those connections for organizations to see the benefit of investing in all that automation, to get better at your craft of software, to find security defects earlier in the life cycle, which meant that we weren't as likely to release late, which means when we did release and we didn't have these production incidents, and it saved the company this much money. And we got our release out on time. Okay? So, of course, well-structured backlogs, initiatives, features. This is just one example of how to push them all together. And then the bit of advice I'll give you is that, and I love this quote from Drucker, is that knowledge, by definition, changes very fast. We read books, we attend conferences, we've got all these great ideas. Oh, let's go work on our end of sprint reviews. And hey, we need to do more trunk-based development and get rid of all the branches in our source code repositories. But skills, by definition, change slowly. So as Agile people learn, okay, you took your 2-day class. What more do you need to know about Agile? You're certified Scrum Master, you're good, right? All you have to do is change all your requirements into stories. How hard is that? Here's a template. You're good, right? The same is true on the DevOps side, is that they know that they need to test more often. They know that they need to invest in more automation. They know that feature branching is bad, but it takes time and effort and prioritization, and to figure out what's the most important thing to work, and maybe to narrow, and instead of trying to go all the way from we manage 22 different branches at the same time, if you can get it down to 10, that's a win. Instead of saying, well, we should get all the way down to trunk-based development. So give DevOps the same forgiveness you gave yourselves as you went on your Agile transformation journey about, okay, let's just suck a little less. Let's build up some skills, and we'll get our way there. The same is true as you start to converge your DevOps and your Agile. Okay? And then finally, the big takeaways I want to give to you guys, and then we'll go to questions and answers. First of all, to scale Agile, you have to scale your DevOps practices, and vice versa. To run these two movements separately, orthogonally, differently, it's not going to work. In the end, you'll find that they'll either compete with each other, or you'll be 12 months into it, look around and go, wow, we're just not as awesome as we had hoped. What's wrong? It's like, because you're missing the other half. The other one, as a reminder, is start with those end of sprint reviews, that those will illuminate so much pain and so much of what is going on, and now you can give it context from your Agile planning side of what you're trying to get done and how fast you're trying to get it done. And then finally, you'll probably need help. The vast majority of people that I know on the Agile side don't really have technical skills or have deep enough technical skills beyond, oh, we should do more unit test automation. They're not really in a place to guide, well, this is how you reorganize your code to write unit tests, to make a reusable framework so that it's less fragile, so when you add new code, your unit test automation framework doesn't fall down. At the same time, I find that DevOps people aren't as comfortable speaking in front of crowds, advocating for themselves. So you will probably, each side will need help, and you'll need each other to help bring the pieces together. Okay? So with that, I will say thank you.